Hi, my name is Brandi Feldmann, and I'm presenting Cash is King, Who's Wearing Your Crown. This video was originally presented by Tom Eston and Spencer McIntyre at DerbyCon 3.0. Tom Eston is a manager on the Secure State Attack and Defense team. He is an OWASP contributor, SANS mentor, community instructor, and a security blogger researcher. He is also a podcast co-host for the Social Media Security Podcast, and is a speaker at Black Hat, DEF CON, DerbyCon, SANS, OWASP, and more. Spencer McIntyre is a secure state security researcher and exploit developer. He has contributed on some open source projects including Metasploit, Scapy, SQL Map, and Killer Bee. He also is a speaker at Black Hat Europe, DerbyCon, and more. The speakers start out their presentation by talking about Peter Gibbons from the Office Space. Peter works at Initech and was just promoted manager. He hates his job and his boss, and his two best friends feel the same way. Peter finds out that his two best friends are going to be fired, so they decide that they are going to find a way to steal some money from the company. He used a floppy disk to insert the virus into the computer, which then would copy the files and spread the virus. Their plan was to embezzle a fraction of cents in each financial operation into Peter's account. However, something went wrong. Peter's friend Michael made a mistake in the software, and instead of decimals, they steal a large amount. The speakers added this scenario to their presentation because in the real world, things can happen and you can mess things up, just like missing a decimal point. Before you can actually hack an accounting system, you have to know some details and aspects of accounting systems. There are three technical controls: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. These controls help reduce the amount of risk that is associated with each asset. Some accounting firms do not have accounting controls in place, and if they are in place, they aren't properly implemented. There is also the problem of limited resources, skill set, and time for an accounting firm to implement different controls to help them be less risky. There are 4 different types of traditional accounting fraud, which are insider embezzlement, overstating profits, external check fraud, and insider fraud. Most accounting frauds that occur are in the millions of dollars. What is hard to believe is that most of the accounting frauds today are still done in the traditional sense by cashing someone else's check or using fake checks. A powerful quote from the presentation was from Frank Abagnale, who is one of the greatest check fraudsters in history. He said, "What I did in my youth is hundreds of times easier today. Technology breeds crime." This quote is completely true. Technology today makes things so much easier in almost everything, especially fraud, because it is harder to stop and detect the crime before it happens, and it is also harder to trace back to the originator sometimes. Microsoft Dynamics GP is the accounting system that the speakers use for their demos. Microsoft Dynamics GP is one of the most popular accounting systems in the world for medium to large-sized businesses. Most small businesses are using QuickBooks and Peachtree since it's costly to implement bigger accounting systems. Microsoft purchased GP from Great Plains Software for $1.1 billion in 2000. The proprietary coding language was written in Dexterity specifically for GP. As of 2013, 43,000 companies in the world use GP. Microsoft Dynamics GP uses client-server architecture, and it runs on the client, not the server. It is a web application front-end that was just introduced this last year. Some details to pay attention to and to look for include the GP client applications, which are the user workstations, the GP business portal, which is SharePoint, the company intranet, which usually reveals the GP and/or the accounting system documentation, and network shares, which sometimes the GP application is shared on the SQL server. There have been some vulnerabilities in GP in the past, but nothing recently. Some past vulnerabilities include DDoS and remote overflow vulnerabilities in GP version 9 and lower. weak cipher for the system password, which was in 2010. This was exposed by Microsoft as a real issue, and typical SQL Server vulnerabilities and misconfigurations. An example is a local administrator group that is added to the sysadmin role on the SQL Server. Three main ways that attackers commit fraud are gaining access to the GP SQL database directly, the GP user account being hijacked from the client, and process injection being done by custom malware on the client. This is the most popular way, and the attacker gets to really customize the attack to the customer. The goal when attacking the database is to modify and create GP database entries to commit fraud. This is easy to do with direct access to the SQL Server. You do this by finding the SQL Server and starting the attack. One problem that attackers run into is they aren't always sure what to modify in order to commit the fraud. In order to figure these out, you have to determine what's stored in the database and how it is stored. The GP tables are not named with good descriptions, but there's a GP prefix information table that you can look at. You would also look at the table identifiers, and then you would put the prefix with the identifier to determine the table function. When determining which users you should attack, the most popular users are accounting department users, controller, bookkeeper, CFO, and the accountant. When looking at the controller and bookkeeper, keep in mind that they are lower paid positions and they do a lot, which makes them stressed. Also, they may not have the proper training, including security awareness training, so they would be very good targets. The goal of accounting fraud is to compromise the user's workstation, which the GP application is installed on, GP login and password, compromise other workstations, and create a backdoor into the user's workstation. An example of how you would get into the company's system would be gather accounting department usernames and emails via LinkedIn, create targeted phishing emails, and then send the targets the link to download in a malicious attachment that may say something like, click here to install the latest GP patch. Spencer created the Mayhem malware code, which is a proof of concept code. It has full integration with Metasploit and Metinterpreter. Mayhem works by using function hooking and library injection to execute within the context of the GP frontend. The goal of Mayhem is to open a channel back to the attacker so commands can be made via the GP frontend. Mayhem is injected at runtime and then hijacks the legitimate ODBC handle from memory. There is no installation or administrative rights required. You first have to start with Metinterpreter session open, then run the install module to infect dynamics, wait for the user to trigger any sort of database activity, which the user has to be using dynamics in order to get accurate information back, and then you can finally use the copied handle from the trigger that you got while waiting for the database activity, which will then be used to execute evil SQL queries. Mayhem creates hooks and key locations. It also monitors these locations and then allows injection of SQL commands into the database as the authenticated user. A named pipe is opened on the local system for Metinterpreter to communicate with. The speakers did demos that covered infecting dynamics, creating a new evil vendor, paying their vendor, and creating chaos, all of which of the demos were used using Microsoft Dynamics GP version 10. There are several ways that attackers can commit fraud. The first way is to manipulate existing vendor records remit to address. This can be done on the front end as well as the back end. With the back end, you just have to change some queries directly, such as address, check date, and who the check is made out to. The second way is to increase customer credit limit by changing the credit amount or changing it to no credit. The third way is to credit balance in a customer account, get a refund. This is done by reporting that you paid too much for something and then they would refund you. Other fraud attacks include mass stealing of banking information such as wire transfers, mass stealing of credit card data, payroll information such as social security numbers, which can also lead to identity theft, and access or modify private financial records, which the company has to sign a statement saying that their financial record is sound If the company is a victim of accounting fraud and they have already signed that statement, it will hurt the company and their stocks could drop quickly because of it. There are accounting controls that companies should have in place to help protect their accounting system. These include matching clear checks to paid invoices, positive pay, which the company has to sign up for, and then they match the checks with what's in the account, positive address on check to address on invoice. This costs a lot of money, so some companies won't spend the money on it if they don't see a need for it. Process for adding vendors to the system, which is making sure you have the correct vendors in the right places. Customer onboarding process, confirmation of vendor banking information, and account bank reconciliations, which the bank compares balances with the book balance monthly. All companies aren't doing all or some of these controls because they don't see the need and it costs time and money. Some important things to remember are never discount defense in depth. All it takes is for one control to fail, such as GP, SQL Server, user permissions and roles, security awareness, IDS, and incident response. Some final thoughts include it's possible to perpetrate fraud against the accounting system from the outside. If you combine malware from the legitimate entries, that equals a perfect crime. Fraud is much easier for an insider, and the combination of technical and accounting controls are required in order to combat modern fraud. Accounting fraud is a potential new type of fraud that may be emerging if it's not happening already. The companies need to take extra caution. These are my sources, including the original video and some of the white papers that the speakers talked about in the video in case anyone wanted more information on anything that they discussed. Thank you.